Becoming an astronaut. It's a dream for many, but a reality for very few. Imagine this. Over 12,000 people apply at NASA in a single year, but only 12 make the cut. It's hard, no doubt. But what if you're part of the 1.3 billion people living with a disability? The odds seem even more daunting. In fact, you'll probably be disqualified immediately. Since Yuri Gagarin's historic pioneering journey in 1961, space has been an arena inaccessible to those with disabilities. But hold on, things are changing, and they're changing fast. Enter AstroAccess, a nonprofit on a mission to promote disability inclusion in space exploration. The underlying message is clear. Just because a person has a disability, this shouldn't automatically disqualify them from being an astronaut or boarding a spaceflight.
I think one of the key reactions is why? And I actually am always excited when I get that, because there are so many important answers to that question. Because some folks, some people do and some people don't understand just the basics of the equity of it, right? It's just the right thing to do when you have statistics showing at least 16% of the world has a disability. It's not acceptable to just exclude massive swaths of the global population when it comes to space travel. We can't allow that. But also, I think a big misconception that we're debunking is this idea that it's too dangerous and it's unsafe.
In 2021, AstroAccess did something amazing. A zero-gravity parabolic flight with 12 people with disabilities ranging from waist-down paralysis to blindness. These ambassadors, as AstroAccess calls them, were split into teams performing experiments in weightlessness that challenged their abilities in the best ways.
A zero-gravity flight takes a normal airplane, just a regular commercial aircraft. They've ripped out all of the seats and just have padding everywhere, and they fly this airplane in repeated parabolas, which is why it's called a parabolic flight. And at the top of each of those parabolas, you experience true weightlessness for about 30 seconds. And then you do it again and again. And a typical flight will be anywhere from 15 to 30 parabolas, allowing multiple minutes of weightlessness, or what we call microgravity. And it's during those periods of weightlessness that we actually have researchers with disabilities conduct demonstrations and experiments to really challenge misconceptions about what requirements an astronaut needs to do and who can fulfill them. And these researchers we call our AstroAccess ambassadors, because they not only fly with us, but they also share this work with the community and act as advocates for disability in space. And they're competitively selected through an international process.
These zero-gravity experiments showed that people with disabilities can perform certain astronaut duties, just as well as their non-disabled counterparts. The AstroAccess founder further emphasizes that it's not only about making space travel more equitable, but also implementing universal design in space travel. That means creating spacecraft and space stations that are safe and effective for everyone, regardless of their abilities. Take, for instance, the Mir station fire from 1997. When the fire broke out, the Russian space station was engulfed in chaos and smoke. Visibility was almost zero. A visually impaired crew member could have navigated more easily in these conditions because that's simply how they normally operate. They could have then quickly located the fire extinguisher and saved the day. The Mir crew was ultimately able to put the fire out by themselves. But what if they couldn't? The consequences would have been disastrous. Even if an astronaut with a disability isn't present on a spacecraft, incorporating accessibility in aerospace still has its merits. For instance, tactile features on the surface of a spacecraft can be used to guide trained astronauts around their ship in the case of an emergency that might shut down the lights inside.
When we think about accessibility, what we're talking about is universal design. And that means designing for the widest audience possible. And at the end of the day, universal design is redundant design. And what I mean by that, in the space industry, we always want a backup if a system fails. And so if we have accessible design in place, all of a sudden we have just safer and more effective designs for astronauts with and without disabilities. So an example I always like to share is the idea that if you had tactile ways to navigate your space station, let's say there's a fire, as there was in the past on the Mir space station, and there's smoke occluding vision, or there's an emergency and the lights go out, all of a sudden no one can see. But if we had a tactile way to get to that emergency equipment, that could save seconds that really are important when it comes to navigating those emergencies. And so we see so many examples of this where when we talk about accessibility, what we really mean is how can we improve our built environments on Earth and beyond it to create, opportunities for all people to work, live, and thrive.
It's not just about overcoming challenges. It's about leveraging unique strengths. There are scenarios in which what's considered a disability on Earth could be an advantage in space. For instance, did you know that deaf individuals are immune to the motion sickness that plagues most astronauts? That's a game changer in space travel.
One example I always love to give is the fact that every deaf person who has ever flown with us has been immune to motion sickness. And this is due to a difference in the inner ear system. Right. So it depends on how or why you became deaf, but many deaf people do not experience motion sickness, which is a massive physiological, natural advantage, because that's one of the major issues astronauts face when first in space, is dealing with that motion sickness. And so here we see just, a natural advantage. But also when it comes to the way they communicate, it's through sign language. And so again, if there was a system failure and your audio comm systems go out, wouldn't it be amazing if all astronauts just knew sign language and had multimodal, multi-sensory ways to communicate and to navigate? Another example I share is the fact that there's no such thing as walking in zero gravity. It doesn't exist. You're just floating. So, when it comes to things like below waist paralysis or folks with other mobility disabilities, all of a sudden that's just a very different concept when it comes to space. And I think that folks who are accustomed to navigating the world, not relying on their legs, are actually better equipped to navigate space environments where your legs are just in the way. You don't use them to get around in the way that you do on Earth for most people. And so I think we see these natural advantages, and we've seen them also highlighted throughout, our numerous zero gravity missions.
For NASA to even consider you as a candidate for selection as an astronaut, a person needs to meet 4 minimum requirements. 1. You have to be a U.S. citizen. There is no age limit. 2. You need a master's degree in a STEM field, including engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, or mathematics. 3. You need at least 2 years of work experience after you graduate, or at least 1,000 hours of pilot-in-command time on jet aircraft. And 4. You have to pass the NASA Long-Duration Flight Astronaut Physical, which in turn includes 3 main requirements. You have to have 20/20 vision in each eye, although you can use glasses or contact glasses to correct your vision, as long as you end up with 20/20. Your blood pressure can't exceed 140/90 measured in a sitting position. And finally, you have to be at least 5 feet and 2 inches tall, but no more than 6 feet and 3 inches. When we asked NASA about its astronaut selection policy, a spokesperson told ZME Science that NASA is committed to ensuring equitable employment opportunities for all personnel and applicants, but also that they look for what could be required of an astronaut during routine space operations, as well as in potential emergency, life-threatening situations where they may be responsible for the safety of their crewmates. The physical test immediately disqualifies candidates with a sight disability, and although there is no mention of hearing and mobility requirements, people with a disability in these areas are also immediately disqualified, likely because they are deemed high risk in potential emergency and life-threatening situations. However, with private space ventures on the rise, we're seeing the beginning of a paradigm shift. In 2021, SpaceX launched 4 civilians to orbit for a 3-day mission. One of the crew members was Haley Arsenault, a cancer survivor who had an internal prosthesis in her leg. That same year, actor William Shatner, who played the iconic Captain James T. Kirk in the original Star Trek series more than half a century ago, reached space during a short flight on a Blue Origin spacecraft. Shatner suffers from tinnitus and was 90 years old when he boarded the flight. Not exactly the embodiment of the popular image of a young, able-bodied male astronaut. One of the more forward-thinking space operators is the European Space Agency. John McFall, who lost a leg in a motorcycle accident when he was a teenager, was recruited by ESA in 2022 and will soon become the first disabled astronaut. McFall, a surgeon and Paralympic bronze medal winner, is one of 16 ESA astronauts selected from a pool of over 22,000 European applicants. These developments are part of ESA's Parastronaut Feasibility Project, meant to assess the conditions for including astronauts with disabilities to work in space. While the psychological and educational requirements are the same across the board for all candidates, this program allows candidates with a lower limb deficiency, a pronounced leg length difference, and short stature to apply. When it comes to private space companies, each organization can make its own rules on who is allowed to go on a spaceflight within legal bounds.
So for example, if you're trying to fly with a commercial company, it's right now entirely up to that company to make those rules. There's something called the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and right now they're in a moratorium phase where they're not allowed to make a policy like that. That might change soon, so there could be a time where the FAA decides that they do create rules, and I'm really, really hoping that if that ever does happen, that we get accessibility advocates in that room to ensure that we're not categorically excluding folks based on misconceptions. But that being said, right now, the people who decide who can and cannot go are whichever company you're flying with. And you're absolutely right that there's this, incredible just commercial value to them when it comes to accessibility. And one of the facts I love is that when you look at, the world population, you've got 16% of all people with some type of disability. In the US, it's 24. So 1 in 4 people in the US have a disability. And it's probably closer to that worldwide, but we don't have the data collection resources to find that out. But when you look at the older population, 60 and up, it's 46% of people who have some type of disability. And that's the population most likely in the wealth bracket that those commercial companies need to be targeting. And so here you have their commercial customer base. 1 in every 2 people is going to require some accommodation. And so if they don't think about accessibility, they're losing half of their market right off the bat. And so that's another reason that, I always want to emphasize when talking to those commercial partners is that not only is it the equitable thing and the smart and safe thing, it's the commercially viable thing for you to be emphasizing. And I think we're at a perfect moment in time to be doing it, because now is the moment where commercial space is really booming, and those design decisions for future habitats and future vehicles are being made today. There are so many advantages to space accessibility, and there are so many advantages to ensuring diversity when it comes to not only just space, but also the next generation of scientists and explorers. We need those diverse perspectives, and I think that's really critical to success in science and to success in exploration.
What are your thoughts on this paradigm shift in space travel? Share your views in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more science news. Thanks for watching. See you next time.